Good afternoon and good morning and good evening to everyone joining us, depending on where in the world you are coming from. It is my great pleasure to be hosting this panel as part of YALC at Home, YA LitCon, with some fabulous US authors. I'm Katherine Weber. I'm a YA author, and I also write middle grade, as Katie sang, with my husband. And today I am here as a super fan of these four amazing authors who are joining us. So I'm going to start with introductions. Angie Thomas, who is the New York Times bestselling author of The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. Hello, Angie. She's joining us from Mississippi.
Hi.
This is when we'd all applause, so yeah, spirit figure. It is also my pleasure to introduce Neal Shusterman, also New York Times bestselling author and National Book Award winner of Challenger Deep, which will be coming out in the UK soon. Also very well known for his Scythe trilogy and is the author of 34 books. I had to ask him to confirm how many because I literally lost count. And Neal is joining us from Florida. So hello, Neal, yay!
Hi, everybody.
And I am also delighted to introduce Patrick Ness, who is also New York Times bestselling author, twice Carnegie winner of a collection of books, including A Monster Calls, which was adapted for film, as well as Chaos Walking, and most recently Burn. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
And Patrick is joining us from LA. And then we also have a debut, or YA debut, Maggie Tokuda-Hall, who also wrote a picture book with Benji Davies, and her YA debut is The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and it is fantastic, and it's coming out with Walker Books here in the UK. And Maggie, you can let us know when it's going to be published. And Maggie is joining us from Oakland. Hi, Maggie.
Hey. It's coming out September 3rd. Thank you for the Walker person in the chat for letting me know.
Now that I've introduced everyone, to let the audience know how this is going to go, everyone's going to tell you a little bit about their most recent and most upcoming book. I'm going to ask them questions, and then we will do a Q&A at the end. Maggie, as the debut in the group, do you want to let us know what your book is about?
Sure. So it's The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea. It has all the things that it promises on the tin. A mermaid who's been stolen from the ocean, a witch with some ulterior motives, and the sea, who's a point of view character and kind of a jerk. And it's really about two kids who found themselves under sort of horrible circumstances, and their entire lives have been dictated to them. And the story kind of picks up in the moment where they both decide that that's not the way that they want to live their lives.
And it's also very exciting and very sexy and really thrilling, and I think everyone is going to love it. So very excited for you. Neal, do you want to tell us a little bit about, I'm thinking maybe a little bit about Scythe for anyone who's not familiar with it, as well as Challenger Deep, which I believe is coming out in the UK. Someone from the Walker group can let us know when that will be out soon-ish, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it's in just a couple of weeks. But Scythe, or the Arc of a Scythe series, is about a world in which we've advanced to the point that people no longer die naturally, and so there are these characters called scythes, and it's their job to go around and thin out the population. And the third book in that series is The Toll. That's the concluding book, and also Challenger Deep, which is a story about mental illness, but told in a sort of a magical realism kind of way, where it's about this kid who's on this journey across the Pacific towards the deepest place in the world on this very strange surrealistic pirate ship. But at the same time, it goes back and forth between him there and him, just an ordinary kid at home who is dealing with sort of losing touch with reality. And then he ultimately has to be hospitalized. And when he gets hospitalized, you realize that everything we've seen on board the ship, we're about to see at the hospital, that the ship was a delusion of what really went on at the hospital. And at that point, the two worlds just kind of merge and go back and forth between one another until you don't know what's real and what's not. Very much like how schizophrenia is.
And it's beautiful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's interesting. I will say your books, both Scythe and Dry, about drought in Southern California, both feel too close to home. I feel like if anyone, I'm like now wondering if you're going to write about a pandemic. So we'll come back to that. But I feel like I love how you seem to draw on so many various real life things in your books. Also, everything now being online, I feel like we're in the world of Scythe, like with the Thunderhead, like, welcome, now recording. And then Patrick, if you want to tell us a little bit more about Burn.
Yeah, it's 1950s America, but with dragons. Thanks for coming.
And it is also beautiful and exciting. It has a love story and assassins and a lot of other amazing things. So.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, good. It's good. I can talk about it more later.
And then Angie, if you could let us know about your upcoming book, as well as maybe on the come up for anyone who isn't familiar. And if they're not, shame on them.
Well, first off, Patrick, that was like the best description ever. Like A+ all around. On the come up, my second novel, it takes place in the same neighborhood as The Hate U Give. It's about a 16-year-old girl named Bree who wants to be a rapper, and her life is turned upside down when 1, her mom unexpectedly loses her job, and 2, a song she makes goes viral for all the wrong reasons, and she finds herself in the center of a controversy too big for her to control. Concrete Rose is my third novel, comes out January 12th in the UK and January 21st in the States. It's probably the last novel I'm gonna do, set in Garden Heights, but it takes us back about 17, 18 years before The Hate U Give, when we meet 17-year-old Maverick Carter, that stars Dad in The Hate U Give. We get to meet him as a 17-year-old as he just found out he's a father for the first time. And so, I won't spoil it, but I feel like, you know he's going to live at the end. That's the main thing, but there's still a whole lot of twists and turns that I think even my readers won't see coming. So I'm excited about it, and I'm excited for you all to get to meet this character in a new light.
I'm so excited. I want to see in the chats any Team Mavericks. So it's going to be amazing.
Angie, have you ever heard of there was an LA punk rock group in the 90s called Concrete Blonde, and they have a song called Roses Grow.
Yeah.
And the chorus is, up through the cracks, up through the broken glass, in the hot red light of a black and white, roses grow. It's an awesome song written by Jonette Napolitano, who's an awesome songwriter. So yeah, there you go.
I gotta check that out.
It's a cool theme song, and it's a really cool song. It's just her singing over a drum beat. It's really good.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, it's good. Concrete Blonde.
Hey.
I'm done.
Actually, that makes me wonder, speaking of that, I would love to know if any of you, what you write to. Do you write to music? Do you have a soundtrack? Obviously, Angie, for On the Come Up, music played a huge part of that actual story. So I know some authors like to just write to silence. Some have white noise. Some have, different soundtracks that get them in the mood for different books. So yeah, I'd love to know for that. Angie, you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, all of my books have long Spotify playlists.
Do you share them? Can we listen to them?
Yeah, like sometimes I do after the book is out, because I'm always afraid that the playlist is going to spoil the book. Like, yeah, there's definitely a song out there that's going to tell you exactly what happens. No, but still, I'm always paranoid about it. But yeah, I have long playlists. My playlist lasts like 2-3 days. According to Spotify. But for me, it helps. Sometimes I listen before I write, and then like if I'm in a space where I can't write at that point, I start listening again to get some inspiration. But I usually don't write and listen at the same time, because I once found myself writing the lyrics. So don't recommend that if you don't want a lawsuit.
And what about you, Patrick? What do you find that you write to, or do you have music that kind of gets you in the mood for different books?
And I tend to actually write in silence, but I often have a theme song for each book, where it's not that I'm trying to write a book of the song, but I'm trying to recapture the feeling that song gives me. I want the book to give that feeling to the reader. And like Cast Walking, book 1 was a Muse song, book 2 was an Arcade Fire song, book 3 was a Radiohead song. And for Burn, the epigraph to Burn, one of the epigraphs is a Susie and the Banshees song called Burn Up, which is this wild, loopy, fantastic song that just grows and grows into kind of a big conflagration. And so, yeah, it's more of a theme song rather than I don't write to it. I tend to write to silence and cat meows.
Oh, excellent thing to write to. I think that I love that idea of kind of, sounds like you both do that, kind of have something that helps you get in the headspace, but then put it to the side. Neal and Maggie, what about both of you? Who wants to?
Well, for me, it's kind of the opposite, is that I have to have the music playing while I'm writing, but I can't have anything with lyrics. So it's just instrumental. And I have this Spotify list of moody instrumentals or sci-fi instrumentals, and I select certain pieces for certain chapters that I'm writing. But there is one soundtrack that for the past 6 or 7 years has been like my go-to soundtrack when I need to get in the mood and when I really need to find that feel for the story. And it's the Tron Legacy soundtrack by Daft Punk. And I can just listen to that over and over. Sometimes there's that one piece, Flynn Lives. If anybody's ever heard that one piece, I will have that when I'm writing like a climax of a science fiction story. I'll have that one piece of music on endless repeat all day long for days and days and days. Drives anybody else in the house crazy.
I love that. That's so interesting. Now I want to go listen to that. And I always think it'd be interesting to listen to a piece of music that really influenced or inspired an author, either while reading or before reading or after reading. So I'm definitely going to go listen to that. And then Maggie, what about you for writing The Mermaid, Witch, and the Sea? Was there anything, did you just listen to the ocean, just like ocean sounds?
No, I wrote most of the first draft while my husband and I were traveling through South America. So literally in the passenger seat of a Toyota 4Runner that we'd kind of changed to be our house on wheels for about 1.5 years. I'm shockingly musically illiterate. The way that most people handle books is the way that I handle music, where I wait for something to get really, 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 really famous. And then I'm like, oh, that's good. Has anyone heard of this? It seems good. And so I write in silence like everyone else, or except for Neal, who writes to Tron. And I have found that when I tried to write to music, I would try to bend scenes toward the mood of the music as opposed to sort of following characters where they wanted to go. So it's too hard for me to write to music. I think I'm a little too easily suggestible for it. And so I don't have a theme song and I don't write to music, but if you have music suggestions for somebody with very basic taste, I would be happy to receive them.
I mean, it sounds like everyone's got great Spotify playlists, so we'll share those later. So both you and everyone joining us today can check out everyone's musical influence. Patrick can just send some cats meowing in the background.
Yes, I appreciate everyone's charity if you're willing to share.
It's interesting talking about, your different, talking about the music that might influence you, also because you all currently write in different genres. Neal and Patrick, you guys have both written across quite a few different genres, but I was thinking specifically for this panel, I was thinking, all right, so we've got contemporary, we've got sci-fi for kind of side, we've got fantasy for Maggie, for you, and then we have alt history with dragons, because Patrick, I think that one kind of defies genre.
Which I've heard. I think we should all unmute because I like hearing other people laugh when somebody says something funny. It makes me feel like I'm in a room. But my Italian publishers for Burn wrote about it to me, and they called it which is the actual term for an alternate history in as part of an actual history. It's called a Uchronia, like a utopia, but it's called a Uchronia. And they said it's such an adventurous Uchronia. And so Adventurous Uchronia is now my drag name. So
amazing. Sometimes you can be Adventurous Uchronia and also Pale Chalk. You can be both.
Also what? Okay.
What was it?
No.
Wet Chalk? Pale Chalk?
Sadness Chalk was my college nickname.
Sadness Chalk.
College nickname, nice and easy. No, it wasn't that. I really messed up.
But no, just on the topic of all of these various genres that you all write in. Again, I know Patrick and Neal, you guys have written across various ones. Is that, when you're sitting down to write, are you drawn by concept? Are you drawn by character? Kind of what's your initial hook for, this is a story that I want to write? Like Maggie, this is your debut YA, were you like, oh, I definitely want to write a fantasy, and then also the time, I can tell it's in, this is going to make me look so ignorant, I can tell it's based on or inspired by a time period, but I'm not exactly sure which time period you were mostly drawing on. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and then from everyone else kind of start thinking about what, again, kind of your hook is. And Angie, of course, with you, we're going back, crazy the 90s is now going to be historical fiction, but there it is.
It hurts. It hurts knowing that my readers won't know what a beeper is.
Gonna have to look it up. But yeah, so Maggie, what did you know that you definitely wanted to write YA fantasy? Is that what you read the most? Is that what you're drawn to?
No. I wrote this book for like one kid in particular, like very purposefully. So I was a children's bookseller for like 1,000 years. And there was one kid who'd come into the store.
You look very young for 1,000 years.
Thank you. Face cream, drink water, sacrifice a virgin at the full moon. She was great. She was this kid. Her name was Claire. I met her when she was 9. When she was like 11 years old, her parents hired me to be her creative writing tutor. And I did that until she graduated from high school, basically, as sort of like a side thing, passion thing, because I love her and she's a brilliant kid, a brilliant reader, and a brilliant writer herself. And when she was about 12 or 13, it became clear that she's queer and that the things that she wanted from a fantasy novel just weren't there yet. It's worth mentioning that she's 22 now, so I kind of missed the boat on getting this book to her as a child. But so I wanted to write a fantasy novel like the ones that she liked, with like big sweeping stories and kissing and rules and magic and murder and all that kind of good stuff. But that centered around like a very queer romance at its heart, so that she would have the same kind of story that all these straight kids have had for their entire life. And so I love fantasy, but it's not like the only genre that I read. It's definitely not the only genre that I write. I think this will be the last time I ever write a second world fantasy world, because making worlds is like super hard. And if I could go back and just like shake young Maggie and be like, no, you don't want to do this, I would.
The world is so fully realized and authentic that you did an amazing job with it. So you can't tell that it was hard for you.
Oh, I lost lots of sleep over it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Sounds like you had the concept, and then I'm guessing kind of you built the characters in from within that. And I'd be really, and on something like Neal, for you, like Scythe, it seems like, you know, with that also, did the concept come first of kind of wanting to do this futuristic world where people have to cull other humans?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's usually the concept that comes first, but the characters become the most important thing. But it's the concept that generally comes first. I mean, with Scythe, I wanted to write a story that sort of took the whole idea of dystopian and sort of flipped it. So rather than a story about what happens when the world goes wrong, I wanted to sort of come up with a story about what happens when the world goes right. So if we get everything that we want, all the things that we say that we want in the world, what happens when we actually achieve all those things? And, you know, there are consequences to getting the things we want. And so I just sort of ran with that idea. And then when I realized, well, if we defeat death, people are still going to have to die. But if nature's no longer doing it, then it's left to us. How do we make that decision in the most effective, non-dystopian way? Because, you know, I mean, we could have the computers make that decision. Sounded dystopian. We could have the government decide who lives and who dies. That was even scarier. So I sort of thought of the idea of, well, what if it's kind of like the Jedi? The Jedi of death are the ones who make this decision. And I thought, that's, you know, there's the story. And then I came up with the characters to sort of fit in that concept.
It's so compelling and so fascinating. I think you're so right about that kind of idea of getting everything that we want, you know, being able to heal instantly, living such a long time, you know, what has to give. And then Angie, for you, you know, obviously I know The Hate You Give, I know was very specifically inspired by police brutality and by a specific, I'm blanking out, but by a specific case, and that you'd done a short story by. And then I'd love to know a little bit more about kind of where Bree came from and where On the Come Up came from.
Bree was a character I always knew I wanted to write. At some point, if you look in The Hate You Give, like towards the end of The Hate You Give, when Star, Chris, Devontae, and Seven, I almost forgot my characters' names, when they're in the when they're in the middle of all the unrest in the neighborhood, they get picked up by this guy and his niece is in the back, and her name is Bree. And originally that was going to be this Bree, but now it's not. So there are 2 people in the neighborhood with the name Bree. Don't come at me. Yeah. But I knew I wanted to write a character, and I knew I wanted to write one who wanted to be a rapper, because when I was 16, that's what I wanted to do. But I also know so many young people at that age, that's what they want to do. That's what they want to pursue. And I wanted to look at the why, but I wasn't sure what kind of story I wanted to tell with that character. And it wasn't until The Hate You Give started getting banned a lot here in the States that I realized I wanted to do a story about censorship. Like, you know, when you're banning a book, what you're essentially doing is you're telling the young people who see themselves in that story, who connect with that story, that your life makes me uncomfortable, so I don't want to hear about it. And that's crap. So I was like, you know what? This is going to be my diss record to all those people who censor the hate you give, who ban the hate you give. So, I went in that book kind of angry. There were times when my editor was like, I can tell you're on edge. I'm like, you think? But yeah, so that inspired me, because I don't want young people to feel as if because their voices make people uncomfortable, they need to be silent. I wanted to write something to encourage them to be even louder, to make some noise. So yeah, the hate you give, I hope it inspired them to find their voice now. With On the Come Up, make some noise, y'all. Make some noise.
I love that so much. And I didn't realize that that's so much of that response to the hate you give fed into the writing of On the Come Up. That's amazing. I think it's really interesting. I was thinking about books. I love both Bree and Star so much. And I don't know, if you could ever choose a favorite, as you were saying, your characters, they'd be like your daughters, how could you choose one? But I think the contrast between them that really struck me was, it seems like Star is almost responding to something that has happened. And that's how you say, as she finds her voice. And then it seems like Bree is really ambitious in a way that, not that Star wasn't ambitious, but I really liked Bree's kind of just stark ambition for one, and I don't know if I think you do see more of that with YA with young women characters, but that's one of the things that I love so much about her, just how unashamedly ambitious she is. And again, it seemed kind of a departure from Star. And did that come from, just kind of organically in the writing of her and the character? Was that something that you purposely wanted to put in?
Oh yeah, for sure. I really wanted her to have goals and really zero in on them, but also just have fight in her. That's not to say Star didn't. The thing about Star was Star found out she found her bravery along the way. She found her fight along the way. Bree comes in knowing her. She's like, I know all these cards are stacked against me. Whatever, I'm going to fight back. I'm going to push forward. I know people see me as this and that, but I got to figure out who I am myself and not let others define me. And that's really what I wanted to show with this character, and hopefully speak to young women who pick up the book and who have these ambitions and who feel like, people make them feel as if they're too much or not enough and never perfect as they are. Forget what they think. You keep pushing, you keep going, you keep doing what you got to do to make it happen. So that's definitely, that was definitely a big purpose behind that character.
I'm sure it's inspired a lot of young women, probably young men as well, around the world. So that definitely really comes through. And then going back and kind of the initial question, Patrick, for you as well, like what with Burn specifically, but also, maybe across your other works as well, do you find that you're like, for example, there's a character who I love in Burn named Malcolm, where did Malcolm come to you and you wanted to kind of create a world for him, or were you knowing you were like, dragons in 1950s, and I'll figure out the kids who are in that after?
Well, I suppose it starts with, I have this theory that there's no such thing as a realistic novel, that all novels are fantasy, even if they look like our world. They, they involve characters they've created, they arc towards destinies as a plot. You have to, Maggie talked about world building, but even in our world, you have to build it. You have to say where this is, and you have to suggest the place, even if it is a real place, it has to be built. And so my attitude is that all I have to do is create a universe where the story could plausibly take place, and that's it. And I've had realistic novels, ish, and I've had wild, out there novels set on other planets. But to me, they're kind of the same basis, in that all that has to happen is that this fictional universe has to be a place where this story could exist. I
love you say that's an easy thing. Just create an entirely believable fictional universe.
That's what we all do every time. It's true. Even if it looks like right now, you still have to make it. And so I think just embrace that. And so for me, the elision between genres is, easy to cross. And not easy to cross. That makes it sound like I'm some genius of genre crossing. It's just that I don't really recognize.
Genius of genre crossing. I'll give that to you.
And so this one, I always wanted to write a book about dragons, but that's a premise. That's not a plot. And so I was just waiting for this right story to come along. And I've been working on another project, and in another project, this idea came up, which I'd always believed in, which is that Back to the Future is only a comedy if you're a straight white guy. If you're anybody else, being sent back to the 50s would suck. And so I thought, well, okay, that actually kind of feels like somehow these ideas might connect. And So I set it in 1957, which is when Sputnik was launched, and it's one of those times where the entire world changes in a day because all of a sudden we could feel that we were being watched. And I thought that's an interesting cusp to write on. And I also thought my family is really massively multiracial, and so I always liked about my nieces and nephews in all my books. And I was doing some research I set it in a fictional town near the town where I grew up in Washington State, and I was doing some research, and I found out, for example, that Washington as a state legalized interracial marriage in the late 1800s, which is way earlier than most states. And I thought, well, then obviously there's a call for it. There was a demand for it. There were people who wanted it to become law. So who are these people, and why don't we ever see them in fiction? Why don't we ever see them in historical fiction, like people who look like my niece and people who look like my nephew and my sister-in-law, et cetera, et cetera. And so that interested me. And while I was doing research, I discovered my hometown in Washington has the state fair. And I discovered, which I did not know, even though I grew up in this town, I discovered that in World War II, the state fairgrounds were a Japanese internment camp for Japanese Americans. And I worked with a woman in college who was born in a Japanese internment camp in California, and her family got compensation there. And she would tell me about growing up in LA in the 50s and 60s, and she would say, like she and her friends from high school would all go down to the movie studios and hang out, and she got Elvis's autograph a lot. And I thought, that's fantastic, but you never see a teenage Japanese girl in 1950s America. She's not on Happy Days, and I thought, all these people who have existed for hundreds of years in this country who look like my family, plus, a gay kid who looks like me, better skin maybe. So I don't know, I just wanted to know, what were these people like? These people, they living in those times, thriving in those times, it wasn't all cringing. It was, these are living full lives of so I thought those two kind of worked. And throw a dragon into it, and it just makes sense to me.
It's so excellent. Anyone who's watching who hasn't read it yet, you are in for a treat. It is my favorite Patrick Ness novel. So, that's, I don't know why that's not just blazoned across the front, Patrick. So it's kind of going off of from genre, but been back to sort of more kind of time period. So everyone has written, or is currently working on something not set in now. So again, 1950s, and Patrick, you've also written kind of futuristic, and then Neal, like we were saying, you've done futuristic as well. And then so Maggie, what is there a specific time period that your book was loosely inspired by, or I was like 1800s question mark? I don't know. I'm not good at history. Yeah,
same. Not great with history.
It's an adventurous Uchronia.
I stole a lot of things from history, like a lot of different story details and world building details, but I really treated it more like a buffet than like a sit down dinner.
It feels very the way it's developed. I was like, this is definitely a specific point, but on the and then Angie, obviously you're writing now in the 90s. I'd love to know kind of from any of you, and it might be helpful for any aspiring writers listening in, which I'm sure we have many, if any research you do specific to time period, or if there's other things that you're looking for. It sounded like, Maggie, you still were looking kind of across the board for those kind of little details. Patrick, it sounds like you were really inspired by these stories of people who you hadn't seen yet in fiction. Did you go, where did you find those? Neal, for you, what kind of futuristic research did you do? Again, if any, and then Angie, for the 90s, are you mostly calling on your, what you remember as a little kid? I can say that, I know we're the same age, so not aging you up one way or the other. And I'd love to know what helps you make your worlds, as Patrick, feel real, whether again, they're traditional fantasy or a contemporary that is, I agree with Patrick, you're still creating that world. So yeah, Maggie, if you want to go first.
Sure. As I mentioned, I wrote, the bulk of this first draft while I was traveling through South America. And so...
Wait, I have a question. Did you type it, or were you handwriting, like in the front of this car?
I was definitely typing. I'm not a maniac. This technology is here, and I appreciate it. So I was picking up a lot from like museums that we would go to, and the difference in the way that American imperialism was talked about in South America in these various countries versus the way that we talk about it ourselves. Like we went to the Fidel Castro Museum in Havana, and that like is a very different story than the one that we tell in the United States, as you might have guessed. And like, for example, one of the things that I blatantly stole from a tour was actually in New Orleans. We went on like a walking ghost tour because I'm a huge dork and I want all of the ghost stories. And they were saying that the origin of the vampire myth in New Orleans comes from the fact that French girls were sent to go meet their husbands in these sort of arranged marriages, and they would pack all the girls' things into their caskets so that it was like a gesture of good faith to the husband, like, we're really serious, like she's coming till death. And that, like, we're dead on about that. And so then they would unpack these beautiful girls in their caskets into New Orleans, and everyone was like, what is going on? And that's where the vampire myth came from. And I stole that casket detail for one of my main characters, Evelyn, who's being shipped off to go meet an arranged husband that she has zero interest in, being very queer and being very uninterested in men in general. Because I thought there's like no better visual metaphor for patriarchy than shipping off a teenage girl with her casket to go participate in a marriage she has no interest in.
It's so fun.
Yeah, so things like that. And a lot of
second date.
Yeah. You know, Patrick, nowadays we wait till the third date to bring the casket, but it's fine.
I'm just a girl who can't say no.
No shapoopy for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that though. That's so great. And I love how you took that, and that, even though that was about a kind of where maybe the concept of vampires came from, and you're like, oh, well, I'm not writing about vampires, but that detail about the caskets kind of from history. That's amazing. And then, Neal, what about you? Kind of when you're thinking, when you're creating these quite terrifying, but also utopian futures, is it just your imagination running wild? Are you looking into specific things that kind of give you inspiration?
I mean, there's a huge amount of research that goes into it. It's not, it's like something like Scythe. I started doing a lot of research on artificial intelligence and where we are heading, what we're worried about, and what we're hoping for. And then with Scythe, same thing with medicine and life extension. And then I focused on, rather than all the fears, focused on the positives on that, and saw where that would lead. But there's always research. I think the only book, there's only one book that I felt like I didn't want to do any research on, and that was Challenger Deep. Because Challenger Deep was inspired by my son Brendan's experiences and our experiences as a family. It's not a memoir, and it's not about about him and about our family, but a lot of the things that happened actually did happen to him and to us as a family. And I felt like I didn't want to write a story about mental illness that I researched. I wanted to write the story that I knew, and I felt that there was nothing anybody could tell me that wasn't more real than what really happened. And so for that book, I didn't do any research. It just all sort of came from experience.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through in that. And then just kind of I want to also, Patrick, and you talked about, again, kind of research, but specifically on the topic of mental health. I know, Patrick, especially in The Rest of Us Just Live Here, you kind of tackle mental health in that book as well. And I think, again, it feels like it's done in a really like organic way. But yeah, no, I'd love to know, Patrick, for various books, where do you find that you can draw on what you know, and where do you kind of seek research out, and where do you go for it?
Well, for The Rest of Us Just Live Here, most of that was my experience as a teenager with really terrible OCD. I mean, I was a waiter. How white trash is this? My dad's family are all Norwegian. My mom's family are West Virginia, so I'm half Scandinavian, half white trash. And I was a waiter in high school at a Sizzler. And when I was the waiter there, I washed my hands so much that they would bleed. I mean, it was a compulsive thing, and I couldn't stop. So I got tired for that book. I got tired of people saying, and you heard it a lot in panels, actually, people saying, I'm a little OCD. Like, no, you're not. You're just tidy. There's a real difference. So that's where that came from. I was just trying to get the truth of it. And for Burn, well, there's an Australian author who I really admire. He's one of my very favorite authors, called Peter Carey. He wrote Oscar and Lucinda and True History of the Kelly Gang. And I saw him at an event once, and someone asked him how much research he did. And his answer was, more than I'd like, but less than I should. And that feels kind of perfect. I want to do as much and enough to get it exactly right, because you can. That is the stupidest way to lose a reader, by getting a fact wrong or by getting a situation wrong. It's just the dumbest way, I think. So I did enough research to make sure all my facts were right. And then you just kind of let the story feel as emotionally true as you can and hope that it covers up any things you might have missed. I think that's my plan.
It's a really good point, though, about how, if there's something that's incorrect, you can really, you can find that really jarring. And then, Angie, I think it's so interesting when Patrick was talking about creating a whole universe. You've done that with Garden Heights. Garden Heights is this, it feels so fully fledged and real. I feel like I could go visit it. What kind of, I guess, thinking specifically about Concrete Rose coming up, because that's set in the 90s, did you, again, just draw on kind of your own experience in the 90s? Did you watch stuff set in the 90s? And then, anything else? What do you draw in for your to give the details to your books to make them feel so like we're reading about real people?
Yeah, the main thing I remember from like late 90s, because the book is set in like 98, 99. The main thing I remember from like 98, I remember hip hop, like a lot of hip hop stuff. I remember the music of like 98. 99, I remember how everybody was going wild thinking that the world was going to end on New Year's Day, 2000. And like, I remember my mom going out and buying a big bag of charcoal because she thought we were going to have to cook outside because nothing would work. I remember that about the 90s. So I had to watch movies and TV shows to remember a lot of stuff. I remember cultural things like how, there was a time where MTV, aka music television, actually played music. I remember music videos. I remember old video game systems, stuff like that. So I had to really focus in on the things that would matter to a teenage boy in 1998. So like, Maverick would not really care about Bill Clinton and all that stuff. Maverick's thinking about, I got my Sega Genesis and I got Mortal Kombat and I got to blow into the cartridge to make sure the game works. In 98, 99, Maverick's like, I just got an ice blue pager. And like me and my friends come up with codes that we send each other so we know what's going on. Or, like that's what he cared about back then. He cared about, having his CD collection color coded and in alphabetical order. So I think when you're doing research, it's good to know some background stuff for that time period. But I think a lot of times you got to really hone in on what matters to your character at that point, what makes their world what makes their world rich, so that way too, you're not overloading your readers with too much information and you're not overloading yourself, because my readers, they're not going to care about the Bill Clinton case in the 90s when they're reading Concrete Rose. No, because it didn't matter to Maverick either. So stuff like that help. But one thing I have actually had to look into a lot is the slang of the 90s. Because it's so different. It was different then, but there are some words that are still used now to a degree that are considered quote unquote slang. So I'm trying to limit how much I use, but like, throwing in stuff like the bomb, and words like that, to give it a little more authenticity, can help make a difference. So it's a matter of, again, focusing in on what matters to that character, what makes his world back then, and researching those things. But yeah, I know quite a bit also about drugs and gangs, probably more than I should know. And I'm sure I have an FBI file now from all the research I've done.
That's so interesting, because like to have one setting going over, spanning over 20, more than 20 years in the setting, but I can't wait to see how Garden Heights has changed or how it, what stayed the same. I'm looking forward to that as a reader for sure. Guys, time is going by so fast. I have so many more questions, and it's already time for us to go to the Q&A. So I had questions about the sea and more about mental health and more about, there was lots more. So I'm personally sad, but I know I want to make sure that we're getting to the audience Q&A as well. So bear with me, audience Q&A. I'm going to open this up and see. I'm gonna go through these. I'm just gonna start at what I think was the first one and go down. That seems fair. panel? Does that seem like a fair way, first come, first serve situation? So much less awkward than having to point at someone. So we've got a question from Evelyn Ellis, Evelyn, like in Maggie's book, who asks, how do you avoid writer's block? Who wants to take that?
Well, I come from the school of thinking that writer's block doesn't exist. You know, sometimes writing is easy and those words flow and you're all excited and you can't get it down fast enough, and then it stops. It always stops. And that's not writer's block, that's writing. I mean, writing is sometimes extremely, extremely difficult. And you just have to work your way through those difficult times. I mean, there's not a single book that I've written where I haven't hit the wall multiple times while writing it. But, you know, if you call it writer's block, that gives you an excuse not to work through the hard part of writing. You know, but if you understand that this being stuck in a story and unable to move forward for the longest time, that's just part of the writing process. And if you can accept that, you'll always be able to work your way through it eventually.
I like it. And it should be controversial, but then I like the positive, uplifting message. Anyone agree, disagree? Debate.
That's a good one. It's I mean, my thing is always my philosophy. I agree with that totally. I've always said that real writers don't write; they write anyway. You know, if you get a book published, write it anyway. You may not want to write that day, write anyway. That's what real writers do.
Angie, look, you're still muted. I wasn't sure if you were saying something. You're just agreeing.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. Yeah, I think, it's just a lot of times I think writer's block is being your brain's way of saying, help me, give me a break, you know, or try something new, like, or take a breather, you know. So when I get writer's block, I play video games. I drive cars wildly on GTA as I'm doing today. You know, or I listen to music, or I watch a movie, or I work on something else that I actually want to work on. You know, we sometimes get in this whole mindset that we have to do this scene right now, or we have to do this or that. But if that one's not working right then, it could be there's an issue with the scene and I need to rethink it. Or it could mean I need to just work on something else further in the book, or work on another project and get myself back together. So yeah, I believe that writer's block only has to be a block if you let it. So
I totally agree about switching projects. That's been the most helpful thing for me. When I try to like push on just one thing forever and it feels incredibly Sisyphean, a lot of the times the only way that I can move myself forward is just to put it away for a while, and often delete it entirely. My least popular writing opinion is that when you have something that isn't working, to just get rid of it. You'll remember the good ideas.
Shooting through the roof when you said that.
Oh,
I like, as soon as I started doing it, I was like, oh, I am like a cruel Aztec goddess of destruction. Like, this is amazing. And so I have been deleting stuff and then starting completely over, because when I found that I would hold on to little bits and then I would try to copy paste them in however I thought, that part was always wrong, firstly, because you get better every time you sit down to write. So you're taking along baggage of less expert writing every time you do that. And I would try to shoehorn that in as opposed to figuring out what the story actually needed to do. And so I love deleting now, and it's been a real counterintuitive thing for me to realize that deleting is the best cure for my writer's block, because a lot of the time when I hit writer's block, it would be because I was trying to figure out how to make the writing I had already done fit with the story that I thought I was telling, like that I wanted to tell. And that's just not the way that it works for me. So I have a really messy and inefficient process, but I'm finding that I actually write a lot faster now that I bounce around between different projects and just don't hold on to baggage.
Oh, it makes me literally sweat. I do the opposite. I have something called a sandbox, and I cut and paste. And my sandbox, I don't always go back into it, but I know that it's there, and I know it's there, and I like it because I can see how much I'm deleting. My sandbox sometimes for a book will be like almost as long as the book, but at least I know it's there. I'm literally sweating.
I know, it's like my least popular opinion. I totally get it. And I do think that free advice is worth every penny. So like,
it's so good that it works for you. And I think that's the thing for Evelyn. I think, you know, everyone's way they write or where they get through writer's block is always going to be different. You know, they have to find their own groove that works for them. There's another really interesting question by Rebecca who asks, what, if anything, almost stopped you from becoming an author, and how did you fight past that moment? So like, real life writer's block? Like what was blocking you from becoming an author, if anything?
I mean, there's the obvious, right? It's like you have to work a full-time job, you have finances, those things get in the way. And I think anyone who pretends otherwise is being vaguely disingenuous. Like there's a certain, writing often comes from a place of privilege in that you have the time to do it.
Well said. Good point. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? We've got more as well.
For me, it was just a tweet. Finding out, wondering if the story that I wanted to write could even be published. That's The Hate U Give. Wondering if a book about a Black girl and a book about Black Lives Matter would even find an audience. So it was my fear thing that probably would have kept me from being a writer. And so my advice is the thing you're afraid to do is probably the thing you should do.
Patrick, you always say something like that about how you try to write things that scare you as well, right?
Yeah, I think complacency is creative death. I always want to be. There always needs to be a chance for me that I'm going to fail miserably. So I always try to do something different that's terrifying to me, because it makes me absolutely pay attention. And I'm not going to rest on my laurels thinking, oh, I did this before, it'll be easy. So yeah, I try to find something that scares me to death, like history, for example. So.
And then Neal, what about you? Because you initially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you came in, you've done adult books as well as young adult books, correct? Or am I guessing that incorrectly?
Who are you asking?
Oh, you, Neal. Yeah, I'd love to know kind of what your entrance into writing was.
It was all young adult from the very beginning. I worked as a counselor to summer camp when I was in college and would tell stories, and the kids said, why don't you write them into books? And so when I was in college during the year, I wrote them into books and then brought them back the next summer, a whole book of the story that was their, favorite story from the summer before. And then I tried to sell them and they didn't sell. But the first two didn't sell, the third one did. And after I sold the Shadow Club, which was the first published one, I was told, do you have any idea how hard it is to break into this area of writing? I had no idea. So had I known, had anybody told me that early on, I might not have tried. So it was my own ignorance of the industry that allowed me to do it, because I had no idea how difficult it was to break in, and I just lucked out.
And you're talented as well. That also played a part into it. But I think that's a really interesting point about that, because I do remember when I first also wanted to try to become a published writer, so many people tell you how hard it is. People who don't know anything about publishing, and everyone's like, well, that's you have such a small chance of doing that. And you're like, well, someone does it, so I'm gonna give it a shot. So I think that's a really good point about not letting that hold any aspiring writers back, and just keep going. And again, Angie, like you were saying, like you're so glad that you did the story that scared you. I love knowing what's kind of inspired people and what people's initial entrance into publishing was. Oh, this is an interesting.
I want to mention exactly what Patrick said is it could be word for word how I approach a story. Unless it terrifies me, I don't want to write it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because you guys both obviously write such varied genre switching, different, wide variety of things. You can tell you're really going for new things. This is an interesting one about, and I think this would apply to everyone. Sounds like everyone at some point might write contemporary. The question is, if you were to write a new contemporary novel, will you pretend 2020 just didn't happen? Or will you address, pandemic?
Of course not. No, of course not.
Yeah.
If you pretended it didn't happen, it would be an adventurous Uchronia. It actually happened. And if you're going to write something contemporary, you can't pretend that contemporary doesn't exist. I mean, you see all these stories about, but on the other hand, you see all these stories on industry pages about, we're going to do a TV show set in the quarantine, and all I can think of is, why the hell would anyone want to watch that? I want to be out there somewhere. Let me escape from this quarantine, please. Thank you. But of course, you could not possibly ignore the quarantine and ignore 2020, which just, sucks, really, on a lot of levels, 2020.
I think what the problem is because it's still happening, you don't know how to write about it because you're still in the midst of it. I mean, it's just so difficult to try to figure out how characters a year from now are going to integrate it into their lives. And it's it's been an issue with a couple of the projects that I'm working on, and trying to figure out how to make it part of just the characters' lives and their history without feeling like it's being forced in there.
Yep. Yeah. And the thing too is, with publishing, if you write it right now, it may not be published until 2 years from now. And who knows what the world is going to look like 2 years from now. So all of a sudden it's a historical novel already. Like,
that's why you should never try to chase the market. That is exactly why you should never try to chase the market, because by the time you've written your book that's on the current market, the market is different. So just write what you want to read yourself, and other people will want to.
Yeah.
A thing I've been telling myself a lot right now is that we're experiencing a kind of apocalypse. Like, the world that we knew before all of this is gone. Like, that's over. And so I don't know how you would possibly write a story that takes place in a contemporary time that just doesn't acknowledge an apocalypse of sorts.
Especially for teenagers who are we're all having our lives disrupted, but I think teenagers and, young people are especially having, missing massive milestones and all sorts. So for any teenagers watching, young people, you guys doing great. Keep going. Sorry, the world sucks right now. We'll keep trying to make you good books. I'm getting a lot of questions about adaptations. So for anyone who has, Patrick and Angie, you guys had films out, which is obviously very exciting, and have stuff slated. And Neal, it looks like you've got stuff slated as well. So people are asking for any updates on adaptation, film, TV, movie news.
Nope. I don't have the trailer. Authors are not in charge of trailers.
Neal signed off. Neal's like, no.
One way to deal with it.
Neal's like, that's a perfect out. I do have some stuff because I am going more towards. I started my own production company, and thank you. We are working on the come up film. We have a director now, a Black woman director. George Tillman, who directed The Hate U Give, was originally going to direct On the Come Up, but he had a scheduling conflict. But now we got a Black woman, and we have an amazing script. And we're in the early process of starting pre-production. So everything is going great. I'm excited for everyone to see what happens. Got to make some tweaks to the script, I guess, and then we're good to go. But yeah, that's what's happening. I'm working on a television project that's not related to any books. So I'm excited about that. And when I can talk about it, I will. And yeah, I'm just trying to expand the resume, I guess.
Yeah.
Exciting. I saw you just did a commercial for WNBA, which I was excited about. Neal, we were saying it was like the question about adaptations too much. You had to sign off. No.
No, yeah, it just hit a nerve. I'm having Dry is being done by Paramount as a feature film. Challenger Deep is with Disney Plus as a film for streaming.
Wow.
Scythe is with Universal as a feature. And Scorpion Charge is being done as an animated series. Basically, it's like my entire backlist, all of a sudden, everything is sort of in development now. In development doesn't mean made, though. It's they're working on it. They're hiring writers, and they're,
But that's so exciting. And I think that's, I love that, you've got this amazing backlist, and then, people are like, oh, this would make a great story. I think sometimes publishing is always, it feels like, oh, if you've missed a boat on something, that's it forever. But it's so great to know that, a backlist,
it all keeps coming back.
Discover your things. And then Maggie, go ahead.
The one I'm working on right now is Game Changer, which is my next book that's coming out next February. And that one is in development with Netflix. And I'm co-writing the script with Brian Yorkie, who is the producer, head writer on 13 Reasons Why. And he also wrote my favorite musical of all time, Next to Normal, which is about mental illness. So it's amazing to be working with him.
Oh, so I'm excited for all of these various projects.
Hey, you didn't talk to Maggie, and I didn't tell mine.
I was gonna, hello, look at me raising my head. I was gonna say, Patrick, you said no, I'll correct you. And I was saying, Maggie, I was gonna say, would you, one, if you have anything you can share, and two, would you ever want to see anything adapted? I personally think it'd make a gorgeous TV series.
Oh, for Mermaid, the Witch in the Sea? I would be shocked if anyone ever picked that up for adaptation. It's like a weird fantasy, like pirate ships nonsense kind of thing.
A small franchise about pirates that seems to do quite well. So I think people do like pirates.
Right. Yes, I'm sure Disney is very excited to pick up the debut young adult queer fantasy. That's the world I want to live in. One of my books that isn't out yet is being optioned, but I don't know like when you're allowed to talk about stuff like that.
Never heard anything, but that's exciting. Congrats.
I, honest to God, I swear to God, I had a meeting with Brookheimer Productions, and there's a Pirates of the Caribbean that I pitched. I wanted the reboot to be Denai Guerrera as the main pirate, and she's searching for her mother, the pirate queen, who would be Grace Jones, and I would totally watch that.
I can confirm, Patrick, you told me about this, this is a real thing.
And they said no.
They said, that's not the direction we're taking, is what they said.
Of course it's not.
Rude. You have any adaptations you would like to share?
Yes, so fine. Yeah, Chaos Walking comes out on January 21st, 2021. I don't know when the trailer's coming. Oh, Maggie's got it. I don't know when the trailer's coming. Authors do not do trailers. I don't know how many times we need to say this. And I've got some other things in the works with the other books. I should have an announcement soon about Burn going somewhere. And I'm working on an adaptation of Lord of the Flies for Luca Guadagnino, who did Call Me By Your Name. And we just agreed a deal to do with Apple. I'm adapting a graphic novel called Snowblind for Jake Gyllenhaal. So busy. I think all writers, novelists, I think you should just seize the chance to stretch out and do other stuff, and don't ask permission, just do it. That's what I think. That's always my philosophy. Just bloody well do it. Because you can tell the story. You can learn the format. You can tell the story. Do it.
I love that advice. On that note, that is probably excellent. We are right at 7 o'clock now, so I think that's really good parting advice. Just go bloody do it. Write your book, write the screenplay, go forth, and write anyway, as Patrick always says. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you. I wish we had more time. I have so many more questions, and I feel like I've learned so much from you all as a writer and as a reader. So thank you for being brilliant. And thank you everyone for joining us for YALC at Home. You can buy and pre-order everyone's books. I believe it'll be in the chat, or you can find on, everyone's various social channels. And then I believe Walker wanted to say an official goodbye and thank you. But thank you everyone so much for joining us.